Okay. So, hello everyone, and thanks for joining the podcast today. Today I'm joined by Jenna Dolecek. Jenna is a researcher, analyst, and investigator of international crimes. In her work, she uses open source tools and techniques to collect and verify evidence of crimes. And currently, she works on crime investigations in Ukraine. Hi, Jenna.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me today in my podcast. My first question would be if you could share how your journey into working with open source intelligence began. What initially led you to start investigating crimes in Ukraine, and maybe additionally also which areas of criminal investigations are you primarily focusing on in Ukraine?
Yeah, I learned about open source first when I was doing my LLM program back in 2016. So almost 10 years ago already. Open source has been around kind of forever, but recently people think of it as just the internet or social media. So they kind of think it's this new phenomenon, but really we've been doing it for a really long time. So in that program, I was trained how to investigate human rights violations, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide using these digital verification techniques and open source techniques. And so once I found that, I fell in love with it, basically, and kind of went from there. So I only started working on Ukraine last year. Before that, I was previously with the UN working on Myanmar, but then I joined Justice Rapid Response as a geospatial and open source consultant, and I went to Kyiv for 2 weeks. I absolutely loved it, fell in love with Kyiv and the people and everything. And I think now there's a bit of shared experience with the war and experiencing, what people have had to deal with for the past 3 years. I only got a very small taste of that, but I do feel kind of bonded now. So it really made me want to keep working on Ukraine. And so I've worked with several different organizations to do that. And I mostly focus on war crimes, but I do also look into human rights violations, crimes against humanity, and genocide as well.
Yeah. It's hard once you start working with Ukraine. It's always hard to leave it, and it's always hard to say no. The work is done. I have to leave and to go for it. Yeah. Also, open source intelligence is a powerful tool to expose in real-time violations during conflicts, to provide actionable intelligence where traditional methods always mostly fail. It allows investigators and investigative journalists to gather evidence remotely, bypassing physical obstacles and barriers. And so my question would be if you could walk us briefly, if it's possible, through the main tools of open source intelligence you use in your work, in investigative work in Ukraine.
It really depends kind of what you're working on, but there are some main tools that we kind of all use regardless of the type of crime or something we're working on, which is usually, Telegram, VK, vKontakte. Those are probably the two biggest. But I mean, Twitter or X can still come in handy. Facebook can still come in handy. So obviously social media in general, but even just general web searching, using the right keywords, kind of building these sort of complex searches to really, really dig into the internet and see what's out there. And then, of course, news sources, local media, Russian language media. There's quite a lot there. So some people, depending on the resources maybe your organization has, they may have access to analytical databases, things that can kind of find other information from other data sources and sort of map it all out. So it again, depends on what you're researching, kind of what your resources are, especially if you're, maybe a volunteer NGO or something, then you really, really stick to the free kind of sources. So it depends, but we're all kind of trained to do things, what we say manually, which is without kind of fancy databases and things like that. So we're all trained to search kind of the hard way.
Yeah, it sounds very simple, but it's at the same time, it's impressive to imagine how useful it is. Yeah. Because again, it helped to overpass so many barriers, as far as I could understand it. Okay, and today Ukraine probably stands as at the center of one of the most comprehensively documented conflicts through open source intelligence, if I'm correct in this. And this real-time approach offers both unprecedented opportunity, but also challenges. And I would like to ask her if you could speak about those challenges and opportunities you faced when you conduct investigations in Ukraine.
Like you said, I mean, I think this is it. Ukraine has now probably passed Syria as the most documented conflict. So the amount of information is just incredible. I mean, it's like Syria. There's almost too much to go through in the time that we have, essentially. So, which is great, but at the same time, you can drown in too much data or get caught kind of wasting time looking at the wrong things, sort of, or focusing on the wrong things. But with so much data, sometimes it's hard to tell, you're not sure what's going to be maybe the most useful in a particular case, or you find something new or something like that. So there's a lot of planning that happens and sort of establishing kind of, I don't want to say guardrails, but restrictions on what to look at so that you don't waste a bunch of time looking at stuff that may not be the most useful. And then kind of on the other side is, depending on maybe who you're looking into, there's not enough information. We're looking at certain Russian groups, that are very, very kind of secretive. It can be really, really hard to find information about them because they do a very good job of not putting things online. Whereas, very young Russian soldiers put everything online, so it's very hard, very easy to find that kind of information, but not information about other actors that we really need to know about. So that has been a challenge in some of the cases that I've worked on, is there may be a ton of information over here, but then there's almost nothing, over here. So it can be also very restrictive. When it comes to, searching for children to try and return deported children, that can be very difficult because a lot of these children are so young, they don't have social media. So, we can't trace them that way, basically. So we have to know family names, if their relatives have social media, maybe we can find pictures of them there. I know that some organizations were using facial recognition to try and identify children, and there are obviously privacy concerns with that. Most facial recognition databases will not train on photos of children because of vulnerability and privacy. So then that makes it very, very difficult to find any trace of them online. So one thing we've done is, we look at news articles, any kind of, obviously, social media, but of government officials, any names we can get a hold of, basically. Sometimes we might have the adoptive parents' names and we can find their social media. So it really just depends on the availability of information. But that's definitely been a challenge. And then, of course, just, maybe lack of resources, depending on the organization you're working for. Budgets have been severely cut recently. And some NGOs just can't afford some of the, facial recognition databases and things like that. So resources is definitely an issue.
Yeah, and may I ask you, when you work, for example, with international organizations like International Criminal Court, how, if they trust the open source intelligence, because maybe, it's long time practice already, we can say today, but I know that before, the trust wasn't always there.
Yeah, there's been a huge change in the last 10 years when I got started, basically. So there's been many organizations, universities that are coming up with standard guidelines on how to collect open source information, how to preserve it so that it doesn't disappear. And it has all the necessary metadata, kind of technical details, and then how to present it so that it can be used as evidence in court. So a lot of that is happening right now, and it's gotten much easier, much more standardized. International law is in courts are famously slow on adopting new technology and understanding new technology. So, judges have had a lot of training on technical details of digital evidence, what metadata is, how these collection programs kind of work. So a lot of work is being done in that space. And now it's almost to the point where it's rare to have a case that does not have open source evidence at this point. But I mean, that includes news media, NGO reports, social media, satellite imagery, maps, all the photos and videos, of course. So now it's extremely common. And we've gotten much better at the kind of traditional open source stuff of like photos and videos. Those have been used in courts, for decades now. But the social media and internet piece has been recently developed, but it has been very well received in courts. There's been several mock trials that have been done by numerous organizations, and it's gone pretty well. And the True Project out of Swansea University in Wales, headed by Dr. Yvonne McDermott-Rees, they have come up with a database of court cases that have specifically used kind of more social media, internet open source, and what worked and what didn't in those cases. So resources like that are incredibly valuable to help us learn those lessons and see what we need to do better and better develop those guidelines.
Wow, it's kind of readjustment of international organizations to the modern tools. Now I'd like to briefly talk about the 6 violations that has been established by the Security Council Resolution 1612 in 2005. And the resolution outlines these 6 grave violations against children in armed conflicts, which are killing and maiming, recruitment and use, sexual violence, abduction, attacks on school and hospitals, and denial of humanitarian access. And my question would be, based on your experience, which of these 6 grave violations are most frequently and systematically committed by Russia in Ukraine, but maybe also globally?
Yeah, it's a little difficult to possibly rank them just because, I don't work on the whole country generally. I usually work on certain areas at certain times, so I don't necessarily see or know what's going on everywhere. So that being said, if we're going off numbers, up to 20,000 children or more were deported. So that's a huge amount. So that kind of happened all at once, but that was a lot of children. The denial of aid affects, as many as 2 million children. So it's a huge scale. I say otherwise, attacks on civilian objects like schools, hospitals, residential buildings, that goes along with killing and maiming. That's obviously a huge problem where we've had, hundreds of injuries. I'm not sure the exact statistics on the amount of deaths, but too many, of course. So after that, probably recruitment and sexual violence. However, again, if you're not working only on sexual violence, then you may not know exactly how prevalent it is. So most of the sexual violence cases I've worked on have all been adults. I have yet to work on child sexual violence cases, so I'm not sure how prevalent it is, but unfortunately, I am sure that it has happened or is happening. Unfortunately, sexual violence is extremely common in conflict, which is obviously with these cases and building awareness, is something that we're all trying to hopefully end, So it really does depend on the areas that you're looking at, but also the time frame. At the time of invasion or occupation, it was much more likely that these crimes were very, very common. But as Russians have been pushed out, or if they've been, more deeply embedded in the occupied areas, it could have decreased potentially. But it also depends, right? Occupied areas, unoccupied areas, maybe border areas, or formerly, occupied places like Mariupol and Kharkiv and things like that. So the numbers and frequency can change with time and depending on the area and what was going on there as well.
Yeah. Because I think it's one of the biggest abductions since the Second World War. So it's really, and also I know that your team recently submitted a formal communications to the International Criminal Court on deported children. If I may ask, how long did it take you to collect all evidence, and which tools did you use mostly rely on your investigation, and also how far did you manage to go in this investigation?
Yeah, so I'm a part of OSINT for Ukraine, which is a completely volunteer, open source based organization. So we obviously leverage open source content to share with courts as potential evidence for these crimes. So we carried out an investigation that probably took a few months overall. Maybe the collection took several weeks, but then we needed to kind of analyze it, put it together, hand it over to the legal team. So it was probably a process of several months. The main sort of tools where there was lots of public statements. So we looked into sort of middle management government officials, so sort of mid-level government officials that were involved, kind of more bordering the eastern regions. So we found lots of public statements online, personal social media accounts of these government officials, and then also their official government social media accounts, as the mayor or whatever. And so largely, VK and Telegram posts as well, local Russian news, and then official government websites. So everything was surprisingly accessible, and there was a lot of content.
Yeah, it was kind of useful crowd, we can say.
Yeah. So yeah, we were actually able to find quite a bit around the initial sort of deportation. The content did sort of start to decrease after several months. So there was much less content as time went on, but there was a lot around that initial event.
I mean, probably it took time to realize that it can play against them. No,
right, exactly.
Yeah, okay. And among all those findings that you discovered, which impressed you more? Is it because of the legal significance or further impact?
I mean, I think the legal significance definitely kind of shocked everybody that, right, such a mass deportation would happen just in front of everybody this day and age. That, I think, kind of blew everybody's mind that would even happen. But the fact that it was so public, I think, is what really struck a lot of us, was that it was basically, a campaign that the government wanted the public to know about, also to probably shore up support for what they were doing. But we definitely uncovered this kind of narrative that, taking in these Ukrainian children was almost a duty to your country. It was a religious and humanitarian duty as well. They presented it as saving these children from war, which they started, or, saving them from poverty, returning them to their rightful country, culture, and language. Or because they'd been brainwashed in Ukraine. I mean, it was crazy, the narrative that we found, and that it was so accepted by the public. So it was just astounding how incredibly easy it was to find all of this. There's so many photos and videos of these government officials meeting these children at train stations, bus stations. They had balloons and toys and, stuffed animals and smiles on their faces. It was just really appalling.
Yeah, it was convincible propaganda.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it was presented like the main humanitarian operation, really. And it's and also actually not inside Russia, but also like in global South countries, and people started to believe even if they didn't before that. It's and if we talk about keeping Russian perpetrators accountable for the committed crimes, how efficient are we today, and what changes would you like to see in terms of bringing those perpetrators to accountability?
Well, when it comes to international justice, it is famously slow, unfortunately. Trials may not happen for years or decades after the fact due to politics and bureaucracy and lack of resources and so on. But domestically, Ukraine has already started prosecuting perpetrators, which is amazing. Ukraine is 3 years into this war, and many of their prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges have all been receiving training on how to handle war crimes cases and evidence under Article 438 of the Ukrainian Criminal Code. So I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is the fastest perpetrators have ever been prosecuted. I mean, it's amid an ongoing war. So that's the resilience is just incredible that, you're able to deal with the daily war and at the same time receive training on these new types of cases that you're not used to prosecuting or defending, and carrying it out at the same time. I think that's something that has really been overlooked and underappreciated. It's an amazing endeavor, and I have an incredible amount of respect for everybody in the judicial system involved that's been able to do this. I think for changes, more communication among all the actors that are in Ukraine. So the UN, regional mechanisms, kind of advisory groups or working groups, and NGOs. I've seen duplicate work happening, or not even a lot of duplicate work, but people, they tend to work in silos. So like one organization just kind of works on their stuff, another just works on this, and so on. So I think if everybody talked more, I think they'd be able to solve problems better, not have as many challenges and duplicate work and things like that, rather than just trying to do it themselves. So it's been amazing how many organizations and people have come in to help. But it was kind of very fast and a little uncoordinated. And so there was definitely just sort of I don't even want to say a lack of cooperation, because everybody's very cooperative. But there just needs to be a little more communication and coordination, I think.
Yeah, communication, transparency, sometimes that's what you feel sometimes, because everyone is there trying to make it best. But sometimes you feel kind of, I don't know, maybe competition, the spirit of competition, that you can do better, and then you stop trusting someone else that you don't really work with for a long time. That's it. Yeah. And I know that, you just mentioned that you collaborate a lot with civil society organizations, but also with the UN as the International Criminal Court and other organizations also. And so I would like to ask, in your experience, what are the key difference in working with international institutions like UN or with NGO-led civil societies groups, particularly in context investigating crimes committed against children in Ukraine?
I will say across the board, everybody is extremely knowledgeable and skilled and experienced. So pretty much everybody I've worked with has been great. I would say the main difference between these types of actors is with the UN, things are very slow, very bureaucratic. There's a lot of politics. So it can make getting things done with them a little difficult. But that's not even just Ukraine. That's kind of the UN as a whole. But they do excellent work. I know people at the monitoring mission, and they're brilliant people, and they truly care about what they do. But a lot of times, we have challenges put in front of us that aren't necessarily within our control. So for NGOs, it's probably a lack of resources. The budget, they just don't have enough for enough people, enough tools, things like that. So they can be a little held back in what they could possibly do. And that's something we're just seeing everywhere right now, unfortunately, with the funding crisis that kind of just happened a few months ago. But I mean, these organizations are incredibly adaptive. I mean, they're really able to change quickly with the environment. We're very good at finding alternative programs or alternative data sources, alternative tools. One amazing thing about the open source community is how collaborative it is, how supportive it is, and helpful. So everybody, if I need something or I can't figure something out, I can reach out to my network and I'll have an answer, within the day, which is just absolutely wonderful. But at the same time, with this lack of resources, maybe they can't afford a child's rights specialist or a sexual violence specialist or something like that. So sometimes there is a bit of potentially lack of knowledge there, purely just based off of resources. But again, there's so many people that are also willing to help donate their time, or willing to donate their time and help regardless. And I've done some of that, some pro bono work as well, just because, this is something close to my heart. I care very much about what's happening. And I want to help however I can. So even though there's slight differences kind of in operations with these organizations, it is still very, very collaborative.
Yeah. And I would like now to touch a bit different topic and talk about digital exploitation of Ukrainian children that is discussed with you previously. It's not so much outspoken. And today digital platforms are being weaponized to exploit children not only in Ukraine, but also globally. And in recent Guardian magazine, they published an article about this digital exploitation of children through Telegram channel. If I may ask you, how widespread is this practice used by Russian services in Ukraine? And maybe if you could mention, I don't know, some examples, some cases that you heard about or maybe you faced personally with.
I am not entirely sure how widespread it is, and I'm not sure if any of us do. This is kind of a recent phenomenon that I just came across, and I think the wider public just sort of found out about. I think in the articles that I've seen, I think it's a few dozen cases, but there's likely more. The ones we just didn't hear about because they didn't get reported on, or those who successfully carried out their tasks without being detected. So what's happening with this digital exploitation is that children and young adults are looking for work on Telegram. And there's these Telegram groups that advertise different work opportunities, basically, in Ukraine or in Russia or whatever. So these kids or young adults can reach out to the person that posted the work opportunity and start chatting with them, or the operative behind it can reach out to them if they've joined a group. So unfortunately, most everything is being done in private messaging, which makes it very, very hard for at least open source investigators to find, much easier for the government because they obviously have different access. But yeah, it's revolving around these fake work advertisements that offer payment. So operatives then offer money to carry out different types of tasks. So this can range from taking photos of places, surveilling military positions or defenses, kind of marking spots for airstrikes or other attacks, planting bombs, and even carrying out suicide bombings. So there is a case of a 19-year-old boy, and he was instructed to pick up a backpack and place it at a police station. He looked in the bag when he was not supposed to and found that it was a bomb. and he immediately took it to the police. There was another case of two boys who were aged 14 and 15, and they were instructed to bomb a train station or a train line in Ivano-Frankivsk, and their bomb went off prematurely, and it killed one boy and injured the other. There is another 15 and 16-year-old boy who were tasked with surveilling Ukrainian air defenses, but they were intercepted by police in Kharkiv. So thankfully, the police found them before they were able to do anything. But of the more disturbing situations, a 15-year-old girl was tasked with carrying out a suicide bombing. Thankfully, she was intercepted by Ukrainian police, and they were able to replace the bomb with a fake device, basically. And then finally, possibly the most disturbing that I've come across was the sexual blackmail of a 14-year-old girl. She was recruited to carry out a suicide bombing as well, but instead of being offered money, the FSB hacked her phone, found some personal explicit photos, and blackmailed her with them. So, I mean, not only are we just seeing an appalling exploitation of children, we're also seeing, sexuality weaponized against women and girls, which is unfortunately very common. But, to see it in this context was quite new for me. But I was really surprised about the lack of coverage on all of this. And at the same time, these children are also being arrested and charged with treason. And I think there are some human rights concerns there, especially since many of these children are under 18. That's a different conversation, but that is something that is happening that's also a little bit concerning. But the government has started an awareness campaign of this Telegram kind of coercion exploitation phenomenon. And so they are warning children and adults to, be very careful when communicating with strangers on Telegram offering work. But historically, children have kind of always been left behind in the conversation when it comes to conflict and its effects on them. But thankfully, I've seen a very big change in this in at least the last 5 to 10 years, where it is becoming much more common to include them in your research and in your cases, and actually look at children and conflict's effect on them specifically. So it is a very positive development. But unfortunately, yes, this phenomenon is very disturbing.
Yeah. But it's important also that the person has been started now advocating for these cases. Yeah. Well, I have so many questions to you because it's super interesting to have this kind of conversation. But let me go to the last question, unfortunately, because I don't have pretty much time within the limits of this podcast. What about the future investigations? Like looking ahead, what's the next for your investigative work in Ukraine? And are there any maybe particular reports that you are working on or cases you're currently focusing on that deserve a greater global attention?
There's a few things. Through the International Bar Association and the Ukrainian Bar Association, they're running a legal mentorship program for Ukrainian lawyers, defense attorneys, and judges. And I'm a part of that. And I'm currently helping mentor a prosecutor in handling these war crimes cases. So we provide expertise on international law, case building, evidence, open source investigation, and so on. And so just the other day, we were actually discussing the use of drones and how to try to prove what the target was or the inability to. So things like that are starting to come up, which are very interesting, very important. And at OSINT for Ukraine, we've been looking at the role of the Russian Orthodox Church in facilitating the transfer of children back during the initial invasion. We're also looking into the militarization of children in occupied territories and those that were taken to Russia, but also the militarization of Russian, Polish, and Lithuanian children. We're seeing the lines of participation in conflict and weapons development becoming blurred with the involvement of children. In Russia, they're helping children are helping the defense industry better develop drones to use as weapons in Ukraine. And future conflicts as well. And then in Poland and Lithuania, they're preparing children for a possible war with Russia in the coming years. So we're just seeing children more involved and less protected from conflict in general And that is a very concerning trend, but we're seeing it in multiple places, but in different contexts as well, which is interesting. But unfortunately, that is something that is becoming more common.
Wow. Yeah. And probably it's like weaponization of children. You mentioned Poland.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably happening mostly currently in Eastern European countries that feels more vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
I see. Well, thanks a lot for talking to me today, and I hope it's not the last time when we met. It's been a pleasure, and thanks for accepting the invitation. And
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really, really enjoyed it.
yeah,
And